You are not you. You're me. No shit.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of The Digital Side. This is Cliff Madrew, Vice President of our Solution Architect team at Iron Mountain, and I'm joined by my co host, James.
Hi, this is James Down. I'm the principal architect for digital solutions globally. And this is our third show. So we're very excited. Three is a powerful number, as all my numerologists out there know. So it's going to be a powerful show. I do want to say one thing before we get started. I want to thank everyone who has emailed and supported and said that they're enjoying the show. I hope you still enjoy the show and keep the emails coming. We want to hear from you. So we're going to talk about some powerful stuff today, Cliff.
That we are. Today, we are going to cover privacy. So, hopefully, everyone got the movie reference. That was Total Recall. And that was relevant to the conversation today because we're going to tie in really kind of the modern day challenges that we face in this digital era around privacy. There's an awful lot going on in terms of different rules, regulations, laws that have come either into effect or coming into effect that mandate specific considerations for businesses around how they deal with privacy and consumer information and private information. But there's also technology that has a major impact on the privacy of an individual as their identity exists in the digital realm. And what I mean by that, if you think about social media, you think about all of the modern day rich media content that's being developed and delivered in this digital world. It has major implications on how that content can be leveraged, both in favor of and against privacy concerns. So we're going to talk about that in a bit more detail. We're going to relate that back to a couple different references with Arnold Schwarzenegger, just because there happen to be a couple different movies that really dig into this topic, and a couple of videos out there on the internet that also relate. So, James, I don't know if you want to set up just why we played that first clip and talk a little bit about that.
Sure. So I've been a little obsessed with privacy lately. I actually saw a clip a couple weeks ago of Mark Zuckerberg. It was a deep fake, right? And he said some sinister things that obviously wasn't him, but it looked like him, right? So on a personal level, I'm not a big fan of how easy it is to become an entity on the internet, right? So I don't have social media other than LinkedIn. I try to keep as much as I can my personal life separate from what happens online. And I even don't think that is enough, right? So there was just another breach a couple of days ago where all the banks lost fingerprint information that you're using to log into their apps, right? So if you're online, you're essentially there, right? Your identity is out there. So I've been really thinking about, how do you protect yourself? And there's this idea that privacy doesn't even exist on the internet anymore or in digitally anymore. And it's a big deal for an individual, right? It's a big deal from my perspective because obviously my information is valuable to me. But it's kind of a bigger deal, from a corporate standpoint. How does a company protect itself? Especially in a landscape where you're talking about, you can create content that looks like it comes from the company. It looks like an officer of the company is speaking, where they can go in and clean out your user data. And the government's trying to react to that now. But on a personal level, the reason we played that clip and the reason this topic came up, and Cliff and I talked about this offline, I'm really kind of obsessed with where my personal space ends and where my digital presence begins, right? And I think you have to be really cognizant of that. And that clip in particular is going to relate back to some of the deep fake stuff we talk about, but you really don't know if the person you're talking to is the person you're talking to, nor can you, from a personal level, know if your data integrity is maintained or if somebody else is posing as you. And that's kind of where that clip came from. We're going to talk about the challenges around protecting your data, but also show you some of the things that are happening and some of the things that are, almost make you a Luddite, right? Like, I'm not scared of technology. I don't dislike technology, but I do dislike the idea that I don't have a private space anymore, if that makes sense.
Absolutely, and I agree in terms of it's very difficult to discern whether or not you really do have an element of privacy when you're creating an account that you may be setting as private. Because there's been multiple cases where accounts have either been hijacked or information has been leaked. You mentioned a couple times, though, and I just want to add clarity for those. It may be a newer concept. around a deep fake, and just what that is, and just I wanted to describe that a little bit more. So, deep fakes are really, if you think about, most people are familiar with photoshopping an image, right? The ability to go and change the way an image looks to meet whatever you're trying to accomplish, right? Whether you're just trying to remove blemishes on somebody's skin or you're actually trying to really alter that image in some way. Deepfake leverages machine learning, and it basically can do image synthesis based on artificial intelligence. So you can train by leveraging a data set of videos that may be from online, of an individual. You can leverage that data set to train a machine learning algorithm and leverage artificial intelligence to then synthesize a new video that merges the elements of the video together. So you can basically represent or alter a video to represent somebody that wasn't in the original video. So I'm going to show an example of this, just to solidify the concept a little bit better. If you're watching this video, it will be helpful. If not, you can listen to the audio. But ultimately, what you're about to see is an individual who's on, what is it, SNL, Bill Hader.
Yeah, Bill Hader.
And he's impersonating Arnold Schwarzenegger. And what this particular YouTube account called Control Shift Face did was a deep fake that brought Arnold Schwarzenegger's face onto Bill Hader's face. So basically, it looks like Arnold Schwarzenegger as well.
Right.
Yep, doing an impression of him. So I'm going to play that for everybody and let you enjoy that for just a moment.
You've been over, visited me. I know your
Yes.
kids. Is this being passed on?
Yes.
children?
Our 2-year-old right now, I'll say, how old are you? And she goes, I'm 4.5, which is her older sister's 4.5. And I go, no, you're not. You're not 4.5. And then she grabs my face and goes, 4.5.
That was also kind of a Schwarzenegger a little bit.
Yeah. I'm 4.5, father. You got to get out of here. Get out of this. There's a bomb in there. Get out. Dad, come on. You got to go. I need to pull up on now. And we're going to watch Peppa Pig. Come on.
I love Schwarzenegger as a baby.
Yeah.
It's so much fun.
I want to watch Doc McStuffins. And then I need my yogurt. Come on.
So that was just a little clip of that video, but again, the subtlety of that video is what's intriguing to me in terms of the transition of from one face to another. And if you were to show someone just the zoomed in clip when the impersonation is happening, you probably would just think that's Arnold Schwarzenegger, making a joke or something, right? So in this case, it's very lighthearted, just a fun use of the technology, but the reality of that technology is a little bit disturbing and scary. And James, the clip that you mentioned, I believe you mentioned it or you wanted to mention, around Mark Zuckerberg, right? And that was floating around the internet around a deep fake, that one in particular, right, was a little bit
Much more sinister.
much more sinister. Yep. So
what's crazy to me is that even 10, 15 years ago, this was literally science fiction, right? Like, people didn't think this was like, oh, hey, this is never going to happen. But we've come so far in the last couple of years that the line, at least digitally, between reality and stuff that's created is incredibly blurred. And the danger becomes, the more information you leave out there, the more information that's available to these nefarious people, the more ammunition you're giving them to kind of influence the narrative of your company or your personality online. One of my favorite movies is The Running Man. So I'm dating myself a little bit, but when I was a kid, that was a big movie that was out with Arnold Schwarzenegger is kind of a theme today. So there's a clip in Arnold Schwarzenegger in that movie that kind of predicted this, right? And it was very primitive and it was very science fiction-y, but it came to pass in a really prescient way. It's almost like that movie and movies like that dystopian future are kind of predicting where we're at, right? So this is actually one of my favorite clips. You want to play that one?
Yeah, I'll play that one real quick. Hang on one sec.
So while you set it up, this is right after Arnold Schwarzenegger's character has a fight. I don't know if people have seen or the audience has seen The Running Man, but it's about a criminal. He's not really a criminal, but he gets on this reality show where criminals have to like fight to the death, right? So of course he's Arnold Schwarzenegger. They can't kill him. He's killed like 8 guys who've tried to kill him. So the TV network stages this scene that you don't see the fight scene, but they take an actor and they put his face on it, right? And then they fight and they kill Arnold Schwarzenegger. Not for real, that's the kind of twist in the movie. But in this particular clip, the audience thinks he's dead. And this shows you what they did to kind of facilitate that scene. So,
I'm sure everybody will appreciate that spoiler that you just provided to them. Just kidding. All right, let me play the clip real quick.
Okay, dismantle all the overlays. Put the digital mat in the pixel memory storage. The damn thing worked like a charm.
It should. Edit will charge us an arm and a leg for the software.
So quite interesting that that they're referencing that they basically a software company charged them an arm and a leg for them to to get the software in order to do this. But just as interesting that the technology really does exist today, and we just demonstrated something that that was produced with really open source software, right? So it's generally available to be able to leverage machine learning capabilities and artificial intelligence as a whole to accomplish these types of tasks. And that's the part that, from a privacy perspective, right, it becomes a bit more concerning, right? With your photos, with your videos, with images, and maybe you personally, but it may be a political figure, right? It may be, someone that has a following that is being used or leveraged, right, to accomplish some nefarious act, right? So anyway, that just shows an example of some of the predictions that movies make, right, and then they end up really becoming reality in the future.
So I think it's actually easier for an individual to protect themselves, right? So, like I said, I'm committed to not having a personal digital presence, right? I don't want that. Everything I do online is work related. All my, the only thing I do is LinkedIn and these podcasts and work related stuff. If you want to protect yourself from deep fakes, from compromises, from hacking, whatever you want to call it, you have to be very careful what you do online, right? But you also have to not supply that information. So you can, Steve Wozniak from, I never say his name right, but the guy from Apple said that you should get off the internet. And I actually kind of agree with him. So I'm divesting myself from a digital presence, right? That's easier for an individual. It's much, much harder for a company. A company by its nature has to advertise, has to market, has to have a presence digitally. And on top of that, and I think this is important too, and we'll talk about this a little bit in a second, but the companies that are out there have to collect information about their customers, and they have to store that information. And one of the things that every company is doing now, including us, is this Internet of Things. They're collecting this tremendous amount of information, and they're trying to monetize it, and they're trying to mine it. The problem is that once that information exists, who controls it? Who owns it? What is your responsibility about controlling the information? The challenge for a company is much, much harder. I just read an article this morning that talked about the idea that one day deep fakes, and not just video deep fakes, but document deep fakes and photographic deep fakes, audio deep fakes, will be able to get so indistinguishable from the original because their digital nature. A lot of the cues that you would see in an original document get blurred when you make digital copies, so it's harder to do forensics on them. But they'll get so good that this article says that in a couple of years, innocent people are going to go to jail because of deepfake evidence. It will be indistinguishable from the real thing. If you're a company, you not only have to protect your narrative and your image, but you have to protect the data that you're collecting against customers. And that's a whole different challenge than just, hey, I don't want to be on Facebook anymore.
Right. I think it's the age-old balance of good and evil, right? I mean, as much as you can leverage the technology to do the wrong thing, you can also leverage it to do the right thing. So I have read a couple articles recently too about how the similar technology is being leveraged to identify deepfakes too. So there's always a balance, and usually and unfortunately, you know, we are reactive to the negative use in order to, you know, better protect ourselves. Meaning, you know, if you look at ransomware, right, as an example, right? I mean, it's totally been a reactive response in terms of how do you better your data protection, your disaster recovery strategy in order to protect yourself so that you can recover, right? You got to focus on the recovery element. In this case, we have to focus on the identification element. You may not be able to stop the content from being created, but now you need a way of ensuring that you understand what content is in fact real, right? And what's been faked, right? So similarly, right, there are techniques out there, and I'm sure that they're being leveraged in development of video analytics platforms that law enforcement may use and others, right, to understand if a video is authentic, right? But your point is well taken. If the technology is that good, if you were able to watch this on YouTube and you saw the video of, you know, how Arnold's face was essentially superimposed or, you know, his features were brought into that video. I mean, the technology is quite good today. And this is, you know, this is not as if this technology's been around for a very long period of time.
No, it's just the beginning of it. Right. So, but I agree with the premise that data is going to get collected. Right. So you're almost in like a Dr. Strangelove situation. You know, I don't know if everyone's seen that, but that's another movie with Peter Sellers. And the idea was that, you know, nuclear weapons were here, right? So the subtitle of the thing was Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned to Love the Bomb, right? And the whole premise was there's nothing you can do about it. This is an inevitability, right? That this is going to exist. So data is inevitably going to be collected. And the convenience and the positive aspects, like you said, are tremendous. I mean, we get a lot of benefit out of all the things that we use, like, you know, Google Home and navigation in the car. All that is a benefit of data collection. But there's a very negative and sinister side of it that's there too. But what can you do about it? What can you honestly do about the collection and manipulation of your data?
Well, I mean, I think as an organization, though, right, you can do the right thing, right, and you can ensure the protection of that data. You can ensure the privacy of that data to the best of your ability, right, and that's really what we wanted to tie into this conversation, because the purpose of regulations like GDPR, by example, or one that's going to be enacted, I think, January of next year, the California Consumer Privacy Act. These are all about protecting personal information, either, you know, from an individual level or even from a household level, I think, which the CCPA covers. But this is to help organizations understand best practices around how, you know, how they ensure that the consumer has a right to know about the data that, you know, that they're storing, you know, that they have the ability to, you know, to opt out, essentially, right, in certain situations, and to have that data destroyed in certain situations as well, right? So it's going to help shape best practices again, and there's nothing like having, you know, monetary implications, right? Having fines enacted if you're not following, and there have been some major fines in recent news around GDPR, right, over the past year or so that it's been in place. And, you know, that trend, I'm sure, will continue. And as, you know, this concern grows, because as it's leveraged more and more, in terms of, you know, the personal consumer information that is either being stolen from, you know, hackers, right? You look at like Equifax, right, and that massive data breach, right, and just, I mean, the fallout implications of that are incredible, right? It impacts most Americans, to be honest, and there's been a follow-up on that, right, for those that have been involved in their information that has been impacted, and now, you know, it's been part of kind of the ongoing lawsuit in response from the company to have to deal with it. And I know that kind of branches into a totally different conversation around how you protect information, how you ensure the security of that data, but it's still along the same lines of taking personal information, right, and having that leaked, and not having appropriate procedures in place to protect the data. And this is a growing challenge. You mentioned, you mentioned as we get into this constant collection of information, and then the next generation of business is all around how do you produce value from that information. So companies really want to leverage their data. They want to store that data. They have to do it appropriately, and they may or may not know how to do that. It's a very complex situation to be in, because our last podcast, we covered digital transformation. A huge part of digital transformation is how do you leverage your data, right? And when you're looking to implement a new content management system, right? When you're looking to implement a new ERP, when you're looking to implement, a new medical record system, most of what you're looking for from a feature perspective is how to better leverage the data. How can you leverage the information you collect from your customers so that you can provide a better service to them, right? How can you collect more information so that you can understand more about the consumer? Because as a business, your goal obviously is to do right by your consumer. You want them to understand your capabilities, and you also want to understand what they're looking for. You want to understand the challenges that they're having. You want to become predictive about that so you can get ahead of those things. That's where this falls directly into, because in order to better leverage that data, it means you're going to need to collect more data. It means you're going to need to analyze historical data, which means you're going to bring that data online again. You're going to need to protect that information. And that is a daunting, process in terms of making sure you're meeting the requirements and rules and regulations around that data. And then, of course, giving the best value to your customers by leveraging that data. So this comes really into the forefront, I believe, as a component of digital transformation. And that's why I think it's so critical. And, that's why we're having a conversation about it today. As much as the deep fake thing can evoke some emotion, as you can see kind of and think about the implications of that. This is something that whether it's video content, whether it's audio content, whether it's scanned documents, as we extract more data and as we try to leverage this data, it's the same challenge and the same scenario around ensuring the protection and that it's being used appropriately. So
I think it's the foundation of digital transformation, right?
Yep.
So I think it's even beyond data protection. So it's about where does the data exist? How long does it exist? And what data is it? And one of the things that's common to GDPR and for the California Act is that you have to be notified of a breach, right? So one of the things that I notice, I don't know if you have this, but on one of my credit cards, I have the dark web scan thing where it tells me when my account has showed up in a dark web search or if it's been breached, right? A lot of the data that it reports, even within the last couple of weeks, are accounts I haven't used in 10 years, right? So why would the company be storing that data 10, 15 years down the road for something that I don't actively use that's just sitting there to be cherry picked and taken away? One of the core fundamentals about these regulations and about privacy in general, especially around IoT and especially around, how do you use the data of your customers, is what do you actually have to store? What are you legally required to store, and what can be purged, and what, in effect should be purged as a fundamental step towards security. Even before you get to, hey, I'm backing up, I'm archiving, I'm recovering from ransomware. Even before you get there, there is no legitimate reason. If I signed up for a Yahoo account when I was 18 years old, that information should still be sitting around 25 years later.
Right.
Like there's no legitimate reason for that. And yet I get alerts that my, I don't know, whatever I did 20 years ago, your account's been covered. Why does it still exist?
Right.
And it's fundamental to these regulations where they're going to say after X amount of time, get rid of that data.
Right.
Because if it's purged, if it's compromised, you're responsible. Even if it's 25 years old, there's monetary penalties.
Right.
That is the best way to protect yourself against these things, is to simply not have the data. You can't hack what doesn't exist.
Right. Well, and that this is, I think, where the challenge lies for many organizations, right? Knowing is half the battle. And so one of the things that we do at Iron Mountain, which I think is pretty unique and something that organizations are truly starting to see the value because of this problem, as we mentioned, in its direct relation to digital transformation. All of a sudden, these concerns come to the forefront in terms of how you just develop your applications, right? How do you what data sets are you accessing, right? Do you have, do you have the right to bring in certain information and collect certain information? What we do is we leverage a tool that we call Policy Center, which, really gives you a full view of both, both retention, but also privacy, in all of the different citations and regulations that are associated with privacy based on kind of your jurisdiction, right? So, we have, I want to say, around 9,000 or so citations around privacy in the U.S. alone, depending on what state you're in and everything else. And so, and it's not just the state that your business is in, right? If you're doing business with customers that reside in California, right, and are going to be governed under that Privacy Act, you're going to have to make sure you meet those requirements, right?
Yeah, I mean, even if you have a website in Montana,
right,
and there's one person in California who's now buying something from you,
right,
you're under their jurisdiction.
Correct. And so again, knowing is half the battle. What this particular solution allows you to do, and this is a SaaS-based application, so it's something that you can get an account, log into, and it allows you to really build out the requirements and gain great kind of understanding of what it is that you're going to need to meet based on your industry, based on, again, where you do business. If you're a global organization, this is a global application. It's one of the largest database that I'm aware of that gives you access to this information right at your fingertips. So again, knowing is half the battle. The other half of the battle is implementing. And we're starting to build integrations into different types of content management systems that will, and honestly, different applications altogether, not necessarily just content management, that allow you to then take these rules that you build and implement them into your practice, right? And again, it's another huge part of the challenge as you go through your digital transformation efforts to ensure that you're meeting these requirements. So I think it's a great place to start, but it's going to be something that you're going to need to continuously develop, right, as the world evolves, right? And that's where I wanted us to make sure we kind of really brushed on, because knowing those rules and regulations are critical, whether they're in place today or they're coming in place tomorrow. Most businesses are not, focused on a single state that they're in or a single town that they're in, right? Most organizations are looking to grow. They're looking to do either business nationwide or even worldwide and become a global organization. And in order to do that effectively, having a tool like Policy Center is something that's going to truly enable you to make sure you're meeting your requirements across the globe. And again, that's just the start, though, right? There's substantially more that has to be done in considering how you develop and implement your solutions as well, and how you leverage modern applications to do so.
Well, I also think that there's an ethics discussion, right? So whether you're under the jurisdiction of a privacy or a data retention law or regulation, right? A lot of business is based on trust, particularly business over the internet, right? So it's ethical to treat your users' data with care and do as much as you can to protect it. It's ethical to not store data you don't have to store. It's ethical to inform them if you have a problem, right? I understand that's not, an optimal situation, but, it's better to be transparent and say, look, we have an issue here. And all of those things build trust. And I would contend to you that companies spend untold millions of dollars managing their brand. And one of the easiest ways to destroy a brand and destroy the trust of the consumer is to have these kind of data issues where, you just can't trust the company you're doing business with. Building trust with the consumer, I think, is going to become more important as all these businesses digitize, that they're not storefronts anymore. You have no place to go to feel that the business is substantial. All they have is their reputation.
Right.
If they're mistreating user data or there's these habitual problems, you're going to lose trust. Look at Facebook, right?
Right.
Facebook collects a tremendous amount of information. I just saw a video. This woman pulled down her files from Facebook. She had everyone she's ever friend requested she found. She had updates from when she was 18 years old that was still stored inside of these files in Facebook.
Right.
And they're careless with it. And that's why Facebook is losing market share. They're losing users. That's why people are going to other platforms. because it's become sort of this evil empire where they collect this tremendous amount of information, they sell it to other people, right? And they don't tell you what they're doing, who they're selling it to, nor do they have any kind of duty of care.
Right.
It's out there for anybody who cares to hack them. They go, well, your problem, not mine.
And they've had, I would say this though, just in their defense, because they've had a bad run and they've made some bad decisions in the past for sure. But they have shifted their position a bit, and they've put a greater degree of focus on this, right? And being transparent and at least this is, I've listened to some other podcasts, which had a few folks from their team that deal with privacy and security of the data and the development of how users are being notified about what's being done with their information. So it's a great example though that shows how you can go down the wrong path relatively quickly because you're only thinking about ways to leverage data for financial gain, and to grow your business, and it may not be the right thing to do with people's information, right? And again, that's part of the rub, and not all of that is going to be covered in some policy or regulation, right? I mean, that's part of, like you said, it's moral. It's an ethical decision about how you choose to leverage customer data, and is it within the letter of your click agreement, right? Or is it doing the right thing as well as making sure that your click agreement meets all of the requirements, right?
Well, I mean, if you want to be cynical about it, Facebook is doing, and I'm not saying that Facebook isn't, a natural target. They're a huge presence on the internet. People are going to go after them, right? But that being said, if you want to take a cynical view of it, Facebook is doing these things because they have to, right? Because they're going to, they get fined, they get in trouble, people stop using the platform. They're doing security as a kind of a remedial exercise, right? I would contend that you're better off, right, integrating this stuff into your data protection and privacy policy proactively before it becomes a problem, so you don't look like you're, saying, hey, well, now that we lost all your data, or now that we made our $1 billion selling God knows who, now fix it. So you can trust us now. Before, not so much, but now you can trust us.
Right.
I would say as a company, it takes much less effort to get ahead of it and just integrate it into what almost every company is doing. Like if you have paper files, right, you don't put them in the lobby, right? You put them in a secure area. It's the same thing. If you do it proactively, from a perception standpoint, you look like you're doing the right thing, and B, it's less damaging, it's less, to your reputation, it's less disruption to your process, and it's generally the right thing to do.
Right.
And probably more cost effective to spend a little bit of money up front doing it right than to get a $5 billion fine for violating privacy, which I believe, I want to say it was Google, but the European Union just issued a $5 billion judgment against one of these massive social media companies.
Right.
And I mean, $5 billion, I'm not saying that there's not a cost associated with it, but I promise it's not $5 billion.
Right.
Believe me, if it was $5 billion, this podcast would have much better production value. We'd have, video would be beautiful. My dog would be laying in the background. It'd be a whole thing, man.
No, but in some cases, if you went back in time, before probably the internet, before it was so easy to share information, kind of meeting the requirements probably felt more like a back office task, right? It might be like a secondary, we do it because we have to do it kind of a thing, right? I think your point is well made that you should be doing this because you want to do it. It should be at the forefront of your thought around how you're modernizing your applications and how you're managing the information and the data that is tied to those applications. I think if you're a CIO or a CTO, I gotta imagine you're working with your CISO through any of these transformation efforts, but how you're leveraging that data and the types of data you're leveraging is so critical. And that's why I said knowing is half the battle. Actually, we can relate this back to, if you think on our first podcast, we were talking about cybersecurity And we brought up a video of one of the C-level executives at JP Morgan, and they were talking about how they had, 50,000 individuals working on their transformation, right? Well, this is where, in my opinion, for the average organization that may not have the scale, or even for those that do, they still may not have the expertise. They may have hired the development expertise in AI, right? They may have data scientists on staff, and they may be well versed in how to code, and train machine learning algorithms. And again, this is at scale for some of these larger businesses. But are they also hiring the appropriate privacy individuals, the appropriate individuals that will maintain their information governance strategy? And in some cases they have, and they are. But for many organizations, I think if it's not an area of your core business, this is where leveraging partners can make a lot of sense. And so just like you're probably going to the cloud because your core business isn't IT and you want to leverage the capabilities and the ease of use and the scalability of the cloud, you're going to want to think about who, in this era is going to help me on my privacy journey, who is going to help me on my data protection journey, who is going to help me even in your data analytics journey, because again, depending on your size, you may not have a staff of data scientists and an analytics team. And, a company like Iron Mountain, we have that. And we have also the legal body behind it and the lawyers that, that maintain this database of information for our Policy Center application. Well, we're building integrations from that application into our analytics platform. So not only can you analyze the information, but now you understand the rules and regulations that you need to apply that information to ensure that you're doing things the right way, and that you're, that you're only leveraging the data that can be leveraged, that you are applying the appropriate policy to data that's been identified and classified by that system. And, that's with our Insight platform, of course, that we are kind of combining those worlds. I think that's missed a lot. If you look at many different kind of web or cloud-based SaaS applications that deal with machine learning and deal with leveraging AI to perform analysis of data, they're probably focused on performing the analysis and getting you the information that you're looking for, but they may not be considering, what policies and the type of governance that needs to be applied to that information. And so again, just to come back to the original point, to have that expertise in-house at that level is a very difficult and expensive thing to do.
Right.
And if it's not your core business, you probably are going to want to start thinking about, who you can leverage to do that. And there are very few people that tie those worlds together very well. So
you definitely hit the nail on the head. If I had to choose as a company, let's be realistic, right? I have 20 developers. Would I rather put those 20 developers on creating a product and features that make me revenue? Or would I rather take them and put them onto something that, like you said, is a back-end process, an important one, but not directly a revenue generator, right? 99% of the time, especially small, mid-sized companies that don't have large scale, are going to take their development resources, they're going to take their whatever resources, and they're going to put it into what generates revenue, right? The trick with us, and this is kind of inside baseball, but the trick with us is that this is what drives our revenue, right? Our entire company is dedicated to this particular set of functions in one version or another. We can go to a company and, exactly like you said, say, look, take your 20 developers, put them on your core business, right? Do that, make your revenue. Let us do what we do well. We can put a program in place because this is what makes us revenue. This is our business. This is where we dedicated our resources. You don't have to be responsible for that. We can give you a program that works on day one where you don't have to develop it. You can take your resources and do your thing. Because in my opinion, a company 9 times out of 10 is going to choose to take their resources and put it to something that generates revenue, not something that maybe becomes an issue 10 years from now or 5 years from now or even a year from now. When I used to do backup and recovery, it was a thankless job. And what we used to say is nobody cares about backup until something goes wrong.
Right.
And then it's a nightmare. companies don't think about this until something goes wrong. I really feel like as practitioners of this, one of our, kind of imperatives is to go out and talk to the market and say, look, you have to do this for your customers, for your business, for your compliance. And here's a way to do it that's painless, cost effective, and it's all we do. It's literally our revenue driver.
Right.
Yeah,
I do think with GDPR in particular, there has been so much news about it. The fines have been pretty large, right? And with large organizations that are receiving them, it certainly is more top of mind, right, than things of the past. It's kind of like ransomware with backup and recovery, like you're talking about, right? It kind of a resurgence of concern around how you're protecting your data if you're taking it offline or off site, right, into another location. And again with data privacy, right? It's really at the forefront of the news and at the top of mind for many folks. Agree with everything that you said around kind of our core capabilities. I would also say that because we're helping more organizations through a transformation, that we can lead with it as well, right? So we're seeing a pull through, right, of more of our capability and our solution set because of the fact that when we're helping customers with an AI project, performing analytics on a certain set of data, because we have these platforms available to our customers, right, we can kind of bring them together and build out a solution that makes sense. One, I do want to go back to a comment that I made earlier too, because you had me thinking about it a little bit more, is, back before, I was saying before the internet, but, what I mean by that is, back before digital information was at the forefront of the lifeblood of a business, right? Back when we really truly were relying on paper records and physical records, the concern wasn't as great because that data wasn't as easily accessible. It was in physical format. And so, by simply leveraging a company like Iron Mountain to store and protect records and having chain of custody on those, we really could build out a plan that was based on just that locale, right? It was based on going to a physical location and picking up physical information and protecting physical information. Many companies are in a transitional state. So that digital transformation effort may be of a digital system. It may be, and we actually talked about this on our second podcast a little bit when we were talking about IT transformation versus digital transformation. It may be the transformation of an already existing digital system, but it may be also a physical to digital, right? It may be a document scanning project, right, to bring new information into the digital world so that you can then leverage that information. And once again, you probably had policy on the physical document that carries through into the digital world, right? The digital side. And on the digital side, it's more complex because it's much easier to copy that information. It's much easier to modify that information and either, not have that tracked appropriately, right? Again, it's a challenge, and it's not the core competency of many organizations out there. And, that's an area that we're seeing a lot of customers that we're able to help as they go through an effort to reduce the reliance on managing physical assets, right? Whether those are physical tapes, whether those are physical documents, whether, it's some form of microfiche or
if it's all of those
audio
things
tapes,
at once, right?
Or, it could be anything, right? So,
Right.
Yep. And again, now in this new world where you're able to leverage all of this information as you digitize it, right? And as you convert that information, it all comes now into play around building an appropriate program on how you manage that data going forward, and carrying through some of the rules that you maybe had in place, or maybe this is an opportunity because you're trying to eliminate the reliance or the need to manage physical assets, to build out a program to understand which of those assets you do need to keep. Because if it's a backup tape from 15 years ago that has a copy of James's Yahoo account on it, you know, and you have no right to maintain that information anymore and still have access to that, what could be personal information if you created a profile, right? How are you going to deal with that? And, you know, that could be uncovered in an audit in the future. So it's an opportunity as we go through a digital transformation to really broaden that aperture of what you're looking at to ensure that you have an appropriate physical, you know, record management policy, and then you're bridging that into your digital world, and you're probably enhancing it at this point because now there are tools and technology out there such as, you know, Policy Center integrated into an ECM tool that allow you to create the requirement and create the adhere to that requirement, I should say, around those policies, right? So leveraging technology to automatically classify content and apply the appropriate retention policy and alert you when something is falling out of that policy and it's something that you need to look at, possibly eliminate, remove, delete, you know, make sure that personal information is not shared with the wrong individuals. All of those things come into play. So again, you know, we're doing this all the time, and it's something that I highly recommend if you're not getting ahead of as an organization, that you're thinking about getting ahead of that. So.
Yeah, I mean, just as like a final thought on that, from the Yahoo perspective, why would I ever do business with Yahoo again? You know, I'm getting a notification for something I haven't used. It was a fairly simple thing from 15 years ago. Why would I trust them with my credit card information?
Right.
Why would I trust them to sell me a product? That's the danger that you're running into. Once you lose a consumer's trust, there's so many other options out there. Why would I ever chance it for something so silly as you couldn't purge out data that was older than 15 years? You don't have the ability to identify that data? That seems insane to me.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, that's just seems like a basic thing. Why would I trust them?
It does. It seems like a basic thing, but from my viewpoint, I'm sure from yours, right, we've got an insider look at a lot of different complex organizations. We've seen how they evolve over time. People change, technology change, process change, right? All of those things can create gaps. They can create, you know, these areas that are in the dark, that are unknown. You lost the index for this, you know, for this this group, a collection of either physical data or digital information. You no longer have, you know, your tape catalog for the tapes, so you don't know what's on them anymore, right? They have to be re-indexed, right? All of those things. We're helping with all these things all the time. But again, as simple as it seems, I can understand the complexity, and
Sure.
that, and again, that just leads itself back into, it's not going to get any easier. So you have to get ahead of it. Now is the time to understand your digital footprint, right? To understand where your data lives, how it exists, how it's being managed today, where copies of that data are going, how it's being protected, and how are you ensuring the appropriate governance of that, the appropriate policies are being put in place, and that you're maintaining them, not because you have to, but because you want to, and because it's the right thing to do, and because it will help you gain better understanding of what you can leverage in the right way, so that as you transform your business, as you collect more information about your customers, that you can Godspeed, right? You can move forward. You can leverage it to, to grow your business, to grow your revenue, and and to provide better services for your customers that are going to make them feel that level of trust that you mentioned before.
Yeah, if you do it the right way, you can monetize the data you have without eroding your customers' trust and without putting yourself into a legal situation or a compliance situation.
Yeah.
If it's done the right way.
I
If
agree.
it isn't, it could be a disaster.
I agree. On that note, I think it's it's been a great talk. I know we're bridging over the 45 minutes here, so I truly appreciate your time, James, and even more so anyone who's listening to this. We truly appreciate it. We appreciate the feedback that we've been getting, and folks have been finding this quite valuable, and that means a lot to us. And hopefully, this episode we've done well by you. So.
Yeah, and everybody keep sending us emails. I appreciate getting them. If you guys have topics you want to hear about, if there's stuff you want to hear us talk about, we'd be happy to react to that. And, if you made it through the 45 minutes with us, happy to have you, and thank you. We appreciate the support.
Truly appreciate it. Have a great day, everyone. It was great to see you on the digital side. Take care.
Take care, everybody.